like, as a representative of Campion College, particularly to thank them for inviting us to participate. Campion College is a Jesuit undergraduate institution, the only one in Canada. And so, as we are a representative of a university system and an institution that is responsible in the past for negating, at best, and stripping culture from First Nations people in the past. And so it's very important for us to participate in a spirit of reconciliation and recognition of past sins. So we're honored to be part of this conference, and we want to acknowledge how important we feel this work is. Work that's been done, excellent work that's been done over the last 2 days, continues today, and that needs to continue through the rest of the year, here and everywhere. So thank you very much from our institution. Now, that's all I'll say. And now I'd like to turn it over to Lionel Peachu from the Saskatchewan Arts Board, who will introduce our speaker this morning, Michael Greyeyes.
Good morning. My name is Fancy. Okay. Good morning. I'm pleased to be here this morning to bring greetings on behalf of the board and staff of the Saskatchewan Arts Board. I'm very honored to introduce our keynote speaker, Michael Greyeyes. Michael is an actor, choreographer, and director who teaches graduate programs in theater at York University in Toronto. He is a Plains Cree from the Muskrat Lake First Nations here in Saskatchewan. He is a graduate of Canada's National Ballet School and has danced professionally with the National Ballet of Canada. Please join us, join me in welcoming Michael Greyeyes.
Thank you very, very much. And thank you, Lionel. Thank you, Kathleen, Jesse, all the hosts, host nations. Thank you very, very much. I'm delighted to be here. I was sitting in the front row. I was looking at that. I was like, that's pretty big text. And I thought to myself, this is a terrible time to realize that, I might have misspelled something. Wow. But I think I did all right. So, allow me to begin. Anne Bogart is an American director. I have the great pleasure to call her one of my teachers. I worked with her in 2005 in upstate New York with her and members of CITI, Saratoga International Theater Institute, a theater company she founded with Japanese director Tadashi Suzuki. It was, as I remember, a brutally hot summer, working in the spacious studios of Skidmore College, a liberal arts college where CITI usually hold their annual training program. I was a tenure-track assistant professor then at York University, where I am now the graduate program director of the MFA. The work we pursued together in the sweltering July heat was career-changing. I was introduced to two major forms of study that summer: the actor training of Tadashi Suzuki and viewpoints, the movement improvisation first developed by Mary Overly and subsequently re-articulated by Bogart. Together, Overly, Bogart, and Wendell Beavers are now recognized as the co-developers of viewpoints, a movement practice taught across the United States and increasingly in Canada. Both forms radically changed my approach to teaching. In viewpoints, I found a system of analysis that allowed my own professional and lived experiences as a dancer, choreographer, and then nascent director to take root. Viewpoints provides lenses with which to look at basic structures of theatrical activity. As part of my subsequent research, as a theater maker and educator, I found a way for my own experiential knowledge to be conveyed to my students and collaborators in a tightly structured way. I've taught viewpoints at York University ever since. as well as at the Banff Centre for approximately 5 years, at the Soul Pepper Academy in Toronto for 2 years, and for a number of summers as part of the Volcano Theatre Performance Conservatory. I chose to study in Saratoga primarily because of my interest in viewpoints. But it was Suzuki's highly physical actor work that caught my imagination. Suzuki involves, among many other things, rhythmic stomping. Every culture in the world stomps. It seemed natural, therefore, to incorporate this pedagogy into my own movement practice, as its genesis spoke powerfully to me. Suzuki and his theater company developed this work as an outgrowth of their highly stylized performance work. His extraordinary adaptation of the Trojan women electrified the world. As he and his actors developed a new physical staging, and then subsequently needed to replace those original actors as they left the company, they instituted physical training to bring new company members up to speed on how various characters moved in his works. The technique is startling and rigorous. In Saratoga, I would typically sweat through a minimum of 3 t-shirts in any training session. There are moments during the training where you wonder how you might continue standing, or moving even, in a given exercise. I've seen participants with tears rolling down their faces as they performed an exercise, somehow gritting through a bad day on the deck. The technique blew my mind. And importantly, I found a movement practice that effectively replaced the emotional, physical, and intellectual void that had been left alone once I'd retired from dance. Today, both these forms are intrinsic to my work as an educator and theater maker. They are demanding, highly structured, and invigorating. I remember returning home to Canada after that summer, energized in a way that I think was palpable to me and hopefully my students. Yesterday morning, I introduced a new class of devised theater students at York University to one of Bogart's simple but consciousness-raising spatial relationship exercises. I could see eyes widening as we unpack the exercise, and then fire in them as their imaginations and critical thinking were piqued. It still holds us. It still provides us with the fire. Anne taught us a great deal that summer, but I remember one particular story she shared with us about her journey as a young director. She told us that she was obsessed with Germans and German theater. Everything about the Germans caught her imagination. They, in her opinion, were the cutting edge of theater, and all she desired was to travel to Berlin and immerse herself in their milieu. After years of trying, she finally was able to scrape the money together and travel to West Germany. But almost as soon as she got there, she realized she'd made a mistake. She was an American director. Her ethos, her tastes, her mores, and knowledge were based in the culture of her homeland, the United States, and its theatrical past. Vaudeville, early American expressionism, jazz. She told us that she had to travel to Germany to realize she was an American director. I was struck by that. I've been away from home, this territory, for a long time. I've been fortunate to work across Canada, the United States, and abroad even. In fact, this summer I was working in Cape Town, South Africa, for over 2 months, filming a mini-series for American television. It was a long way from home. But it was necessary for me, just as traveling to Skidmore College in New York State was necessary for me 11 years ago. Being so far from home refocuses the lenses of your eyes to your home and your place in it. South Africa is a stunningly beautiful country. There's a quality of light there that is difficult to describe. But suffice to say, it has a tangible magic. The film industry has realized this, and numerous projects and television series have been and continue to be shot in South Africa to take advantage of it. There are also significant financial incentives offered by the South African government, which include low wages for the film crews, that convince Hollywood producers that 23-hour flights to its glorious locations are worth the investment. But my journey begins with a script description of the character I was cast to play in the project in Cape Town. You had just seen it earlier. Canonicus, a Sachem of the Narragansett stands. He is tall and muscular. As I finished reading this, I put down the half-eaten donut I was holding in my hand onto the table, the previously delicious sugary dough rapidly losing its flavor, now mixed with a distinctly acid taste in my mouth. Great. The project in question, a 4-hour miniseries for National Geographic Channel, is called Saints and Strangers. Written by Eric Overmyer and Seth Fisher, Saints and Strangers is a provocative retelling of the mythology of the voyage of the Mayflower and how the Atlantic coastal nations reacted and responded to the settlement of Plymouth. In other words, it's a period piece, which means that we, the actors playing First Nations in the American parlance and Native Americans, would be wearing period clothes. And it has been my experience in that industry that inevitably there is a sequence where the men are shirtless. Saints and Strangers had just such a moment, and his character descriptor had given me all the warning I needed. This meant I needed to get back into pre-Columbian shape. Our communities were active, healthy, and vibrant, and we looked it. But in mid-June of this year, when I received the script, I was none of these. I was, by any estimation, exhausted, overworked, and desk-bound. Plus, I've gone soft in the middle. I was the thing I'd always feared becoming, the out-of-shape movement professor. I fortunately did not have to audition for the part, but was suggested by the casting director who had cast me previously in a number of different productions, so they did not realize that I no longer look like the pictures, plentiful on the internet, showing me as a buff 20-something actor, freshly retired from a professional dance career. Needless to say, I had my work cut out for me. So, over the course of about 12 weeks, beginning here at home, I began to train physically. Slowly at first. I had to overcome a few nagging injuries, but then I began to gain strength and a little bit of momentum. I changed my diet completely. The changes were subtle at first, but became palpable by the time I was about to film my first scenes in South Africa. It was revelatory. Please understand that as an Indigenous performer, I have an uneasy relationship with period film work. On the one hand, such work represents more than half of my professional output as an actor, while at the same time, I resent our depiction in period films as it entrenches for a worldwide audience that our cultures and communities exist primarily in the past, vestigial. So I entered the process with a certain degree of wariness. I do not do many film or television projects anymore, as my work as a professor and the artistic director of Signal Theatre precludes it. And as an established performer, I'm also judicious about what I will lend my name and efforts. Saints and Strangers, a Sony Pictures project, represented an interesting set of choices. First of all, the provocation of the storyline appealed to me. Saints and Strangers looks at the passenger manifest of the infamous Mayflower through a new lens. It asserts that half of the passengers were either religious zealots fleeing persecution in England, while the other half were con men fleeing justice. The miniseries proposes that the Mayflower and the settlement of Plymouth provided the American nation with a DNA blueprint, which we still see resonating across the headlines to this day. The other part was Renee Haynes, the casting director of the project. She really only involves herself in projects that have integrity, artistically and politically, and in terms of production quality. This project was exciting for all those reasons, so I said yes. I said previously about my attempts to regain my form that working on this mini-series was revelatory, and it was because of the writing. Indigenous characters in projects such as these are usually written by non-Indigenous writers, as was the case here, with little connection to our respective cultures. Obviously, there are exceptions to the rule. John Fusco obviously comes to mind. But without that type of cultural knowledge or experience, these writers usually have only one choice, since they can no longer safely depict us as savages, writing us as some version of noble. The problem is that we are all so depicted. Thus, our community depiction is monolithic. We're all wonderful. But there is no community or family like this in existence. Where is the crazy uncle? The slightly demented grandmother? Or the maniac cousin? Yes, those are all cliches too. But writers from outside the community steer entirely away from them in fear of offending or painting us negatively. Saints and Strangers took another path. In it, the Indigenous characters vary widely, and the characterizations are complex and sophisticated. It was easily some of the best writing for Indigenous characters I've seen coming out of Hollywood in eons. My character Canonicus is especially so. He is quite paradoxical. On the one hand, he is insufferably arrogant and ambitious. He is power mad. And with a nation that at that point was untouched by disease, he was literally the most powerful sachem in the region. The Narragansett whom he led were a superpower. With 5,000 warriors, he tithed the entire region mercilessly. His depiction gave a fascinating context to Masasui, sachem of the Pokanoket people, who at that time had a mere 500 survivors from the various plagues and other incursions. Masasui played a pivotal role in the survival of the Plymouth colony. But in the context of the Narragansett and Canonicus's predations, the Europeans, we realized, were the lesser of two evils. It allowed Raul Trujillo, a very experienced actor playing Masasui, to play a wide range of tactics and responses. In Saints and Strangers, no one wanted the Mayflower settlers to remain. They were filthy, scurvied, and divisive. And Canonicus, my character, certainly wanted them wiped from the earth. But having to decide between these horrible new people and a lunatic like Canonicus, Masasui chose to ally himself with the settlers, creating an incredibly tenuous and sophisticated relationship, one that changed and shifted completely, continuously, which the script for this project followed closely. By taking a risk to create a foil in Canonicus, Overmeyer and Fisher gave the Indigenous characters in the miniseries 3 dimensions to work in. And in the end, we see that Masasui was neither a villain nor a fool, but his decision to help the settlers was based on immediate needs and born out of urgent political necessity. This is not usually the kind of room we are given to play in period films. Even Canonicus, a seeming blowhard, was allowed room to grow and change and contradict. With a crucial 2-page scene near the end of Hour 3, he confides to Massasoit that he's actually afraid of the English. He sees in them the end of us, our ways, and our future. For me, the level of discourse and the range of intention and backstory for Indigenous characters in this project was finally equal in complexity to the range of characterization and intention in the non-Indigenous cast. Was the film historically accurate? Not entirely, not strictly, as we don't know if Canonicus was exactly as he was written or as I played him. But the point being that the writers were freed from the notion of supposed authenticity in order to paint vivid and breathing portraits. As soon as I read the script, I knew how I wanted to play this guy. I doubt anyone will see this when the project finally airs, but I decided to base Canonicus on another arrogant, wealthy, power-mad fool in our consciousness. Donald Trump. Sans the comb-over. I think I would have had a full understanding of how to play this character, even if he was contemporary. If he wore a suit and a tie, for example. But the fact that it was period work, coupled with the fear of looking like an out-of-shape professor preserved forever on film, motivated me to address my physical conditioning as an actor. It was this double process that I found revelatory. I mean that by preparing myself physically to play a character like this, I was reminded that any approach to playing in general must be physically grounded, connected, and rigorous. In every scene, I was prepared to take physical risk, whether or not I had anticipated the scene as action-based or if it was mostly talking. With those options and methodology available and how the scenes were approached, the Canonicus that I helped create bristled with both fear and energy, aching to stretch those muscles and assume control of the whole region. Interestingly, I discovered that after the period examined in the miniseries and subsequent to the events of King Philip's War in 1675, Canonicus foolishly went to war with the Mohawks, who decimated his standing 5,000-man army, leaving him without a power base. So I walk away from a project that filmed on the other side of the planet, set in a time period equally far from today, coming to an essential realization about performance in the Indigenous context. We must look at performance, and particularly the training of our actors through a physical lens. This connects us, first of all, to our pasts, wherein we relied on our physical knowledge and prowess to survive, while at the same time, it charts a new course through contemporary performance, one that does not follow the psychological approach championed by the American pedagogues of the group theater, whose philosophy still has an iron grip on the academy and how we perceive performance training. Michael Chekhov and others, even Stanislavski himself, commented many times that the approach, which became known as the method, was misconstrued. Stanislavski insisted that his approach was primarily a physical one. Within our cultural practices, we see a vibrant physical terrain. Why would our performance training not emerge from therein? And it is already required in the professional landscape. If one were to look at the broad terrain of contemporary Indigenous performance, you would see a number of companies, some new, some more recently established, making exciting work. In my opinion, these companies are leading our community in terms of energy, risk, rigor, and public reach. They include Gahawi Dance Theatre, Article 11, Raven Spirit, Company Vini Dansi, Red Sky, Damla Hamid, and our own company, Signal Theatre. Their work includes dance, physical theater, movement, all relying on physically fluent or engaged performers. The physical terrain of our theater has changed. It's heightened. And they require performers who are adept in those realms. Recently, Marageku, a performance company from Australia, and performer Delisa Pigram presented a work in Toronto as part of Danceworks season called Good Ear, Good Year. This was astonishing theater. As I watched it, I remember thinking, this is a wake-up call to every Indigenous actor in Canada. Ms. Pigram's work was incredibly physical, emotional, and seething with intense energy. Her body is ferociously strong and lithe, and the physical demands of the piece were daunting. This is the new playing field. It already exists. The profession is demanding this kind of performer to fill our stages. And if we do not bring ourselves to play here, then we are shadows. As my friend and mentor Denis Lacroix once described, we will be left playing ghosts of ourselves. After the 12 weeks of physical conditioning I undertook to prepare for my work in South Africa, I feel I might be ready to engage on this level of performance finally. I was a different actor after that training. We need strength to portray members of our community. It is easier to portray this if we are strong. Actually strong. I had tremendous confidence in myself as I walked onto that set. And confidence is always a tenuous thing with actors. It is the one thing an actor must be able to project without guile or falsity when they audition for a role. Confident actors are the ones who are hired most often. And work gives you this confidence. So if you get outside the loop of employment, you will struggle. But a physical practice, one in which you attain mastery, can be maintained without the imprimatur of the industry or casting decisions. And walking into a room with physical confidence, bristling with actual energy and health, is not something easily dismissed. The training paradigms I glimpsed and experienced in South Africa were not solely focused upon the physical context or the physical aspect, much in the same way that I discovered Suzuki training while ostensibly studying viewpoints more than a decade ago. I discovered something hugely exciting to me through the decision for our characters in Saints and Strangers to speak the Western dialect of Abenaki. But this needs a little backstory. Examining Phil Lucas and Robert Hagopian's 1979 5-part documentary series, Images of Indians, Carol Gerster details a strategy of recontextualizing Hollywood formulas and formulaic characters by reviewing them from a variety of contemporary American Indian perspectives. We, as a community, who find ourselves working within the power structures and narratives of Hollywood, have always battled, literally and figuratively, to find an acceptable level of subjectivity in the work offered us, and a way to rewrite and assume authorial power in our representation. The question before us, where do our original languages sit inside the paradigms of mainstream media? Still resonant for me. What do we do? I was actually still living and working in New York City in the early 90s when the landmark feature film Dances with Wolves was released. I remember seeing it at the cinemas at 890 Broadway, downstairs from where I was dancing with the choreographer Elliot Feld. It was this film, along with Last of the Mohicans, that convinced me to transition from a dance career to one in filmed media. And in this film, the Indigenous actors spoke Lakota. I'd never seen a film where original languages were so dominant. The purpose of language in the film was fairly obvious. The Lakota were alien, quote unquote, to Dunbar, played by Kevin Costner, and the settlers were just as alien to the Lakota people. Language was a separator. For me, a Cree person and an English speaker, Lakota was also a signifier for other. I'm sure this was a widely held point of view, if you weren't Lakota yourself. It was one of the first times watching a film depicting us where I felt pride in how we were portrayed. The Lakota was subtitled for the most part, with various Indian characters learning rudimentary English over the course of the film to ultimately erode the distinctions and communication gaps between Dunbar and the Lakotas themselves. As they learned English, they became less other. Who can forget Graham Greene's character Kicking Bird and his endearing attempts to pronounce the word buffalo? This was purposeful, because the film's raison d'etre was to bring us inside the beauty and integrity of the Lakota community with its complex relationships and history. We had to empathize with them in order for the film to work, and despise the vile settler soldiers and racketeers. So the use of an original language was both a brilliant artistic choice and a problem. Gil Carden, an Indigenous writer, filmmaker, and producer, used another approach in addressing this issue of subjectivity. In 1998, filming here in southern Saskatchewan on Pasqua First Nation, I was part of another fascinating experiment to erode our perception as other. Cardinal cast me in his CBC miniseries Big Bear, starring the late, great Gordon Tutusas. Based upon Rudy Weeb's novel, the screenplay was adapted for television by Cardinal with a unique premise. All the Indigenous characters in the miniseries spoke English, while all the settler characters, aka old stock Canadians, spoke in Jabberwocky, an invented language that each white actor had to learn and master. Whenever they spoke English to each other, we, the Indigenous characters in the work, and importantly, the entire English-speaking audience watching the show, would scratch our collective heads and wonder, what the hell are they talking about? I remember at the time feeling quite badly for the white actors. Wonderful Anglophone and Francophone performers who are always practicing their Jabberwocky, agonizing over the complexity of their double-duty workload on the show. I loved working on that miniseries, playing one of our cultural heroes, Wandering Spirit. But it was the subjectivity of an Indigenous director demanding in the very structure of the work itself a means by which our stories and our characterizations were seen empathetically, while placing the settlers and their agenda as the new other. These are just two examples of how our original languages have been used in mainstream media projects. Paul Edwards, our director for Saints and Strangers, was obsessed with this question. In nearly every conversation I had with him about it, he'd bring up the example of the 1970 film Tora, Tora, Tora. The incredible attack on Pearl Harbor, as told from both the United States and Japanese sides. A silky voiced narrator intones. Once, two nations made war. Today they have collaborated to make a motion picture of unequaled magnitude and importance, recreating the actual events leading up to the day that changed the course of history. 20th Century Fox presents, then with the crackly sound of a 1940s radio headset, Tora, Tora, Tora. An unprecedented film bringing you answers to one of the most controversial mysteries of our age. How could the attack on Pearl Harbor have happened? Why was one nation unprepared while another was geared for war? In this film, Paul explained that Japanese actors would begin all their dialogue in Japanese, but then they'd cut, and the new camera angle would begin with a dolly move off someone's back to the same group now speaking English. The filmmakers even then wanted to avoid the eye shifting from actors' faces down to the subtitles at the bottom of the screen that would effectively alienate and otherize the Japanese. But again, the answer was to have them speak English. Paul Edwards wanted to hear original dialects in the film, bringing the language to an American culture And in this particular case, it was an endangered dialect. He even told me about the research he'd done on subtitling, which itself was a revelation. Since the advent of screen-based information, they've been testing our ability to absorb and read text that appears on screens. And with its ubiquity, we are becoming extremely fluent at it. The most surprising thing revealed by eye-tracking research that they've done is that contemporary audiences don't track up and down anymore with subtitles. We've, through abundant practice, become adept at reading text without all the eye movement that our parents had to manage. We just absorb it. So Paul knew that the North American audiences would still watch our performances and at the same time understand us. But he was prepared to go Torah, Torah, Torah with us if it wasn't firing. After the first day of us on set, speaking of Abenaki, he knew he'd nailed it. It was because the Indigenous actors had nailed it. We were taught by a brilliant language specialist, Jesse Bowman-Bruchak, who is one of 12 Western Abenaki speakers left in the world. We spoke this dialect as a language common to our various tribal nations, Narragansett, Peconic, etc. Circa 17th century is depicted in the show. It was difficult. It is an Algonquin language, with unique word sounds, grammar, and constructions that I have not seen in over 20 years of working in film. To say the cast was challenged by the language is an understatement. We were flummoxed because we understood the political and artistic importance of doing it right. We are not speakers, so are relying upon the precision of the teaching and our ability to precisely mimic the sound combinations and rhythms we are hearing. Here are two examples from the script. Inno dabno iglismona witukahali tiligilidzi namaskik. Ni nalagansa kada wisambanawazin te wizioholi. Kizela anda in wawaldamuan. Kama an wawinawan kinzanas. Uizwan kan. Anda ni dambana. Anda kidabatis quantum. The I is pronounced E-E, as in beat. The circumflex above the O turns that letter into a double sound, en, as in bone, with the unvoiced as in the French nasal, un. The accent indicated by the underline is on the final syllable, unless it is a 3-syllable or greater word, which is common, then it is typically on the 3rd syllable. A W followed by a consonant is pronounced ooh, as in cool, unless it is followed by a vowel, which then makes it a regular W sound. These are just a few of the language rules. Some of the words were really long. This is a medium length one. Jiligilidzi. So the way he taught us is, the only way you can deal with it is just piece by piece. Lidzi, so I's or E's. Say it with me. Lidzi. Lidzi. One more time. Lidzi. Lidzi. Gilidzi. 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 Zilegilidzi. Zilegilidzi. That word gave me fits. We'd start with the last syllable and just move our way through. And we had to do this with every word we had. The language coaching was laser-like in its precision. And our approach as actors was born-again religious. We were competing with each other to sound more fluent than the other guys. And it took hour after hour, coaching session after coaching session, day upon day, individual practice, walking on Cape Town streets with Jesse, feeding us lines while we dodged pedestrians and traffic and hazards, so that when we arrived on set, we were ninjas. 2 takes, usually, but never more than 3 or 4 for language accuracy. If we did more takes, it was a camera or sound base, never for the language. The pilgrims, the saints and strangers, were played by English and Irish actors who are famous for their professionalism and crisp technique. They stood at attention when we spoke. Our words flowing out with energy, conviction, and power. Deadly accurate. And this is a language we didn't understand. We did double translations. Parallel understanding of the text and its sounds, what we were saying vocally, and how it translated in our minds as English, like railroad tracks. And our brains were the connectors that had rolled, sounding one way, thinking another. And the translations, it's just not a one-to-one translation. It doesn't work that way. Since the Abenaki dialogue required us to learn another intrinsic indigenous thought process, embedded in the structure and words themselves. By learning how Abenaki is structured, we glimpsed the heart of the community. A meaning embedded in language that was obscured by English. Like, I'm fairly professional. I always know my lines when I go in front of the camera or I'm standing on stage. But this was work at another level. A more rigorous and exacting level than I think any one of us, veterans of a number of high-profile projects, had ever known. We were on the ground floor of a new paradigm. This is the new playing field. It also makes abundant professional sense, like training an actor how to ride a horse, drive a car, or handle a firearm safely and fluently. Those three skills alone are used again and again in movies that feature our communities. And if we teach our emerging actors these techniques, we teach them a methodology for working in any language with precision and craftsmanship. Just as I found a newfound strength in performance through my physical approach and level of conditioning, working in dialect, inside indigenous language constructs, I glimpsed a future for training indigenous performers. And I did so by traveling halfway across the globe. But I needed the distance to see something else, something that I'm still unraveling as I stand before you. While in Cape Town, I had to simultaneously get into shape and rehab some old injuries that precluded me from actually doing the exercises that would get me back into shape. So I sought out a team of therapists, including a massage therapist and two marvelous physiotherapists a short distance from my hotel. Recommended by the production, I worked with them through my entire 2 months in Cape Town. We spoke about the project, about Canada, the politics of South Africa, our families, you name it. I had a lot to talk about, as being in South Africa was mind-blowing on so many levels. The still tangible and powerful legacy of apartheid, the black majority and huge so-called colored populations, and a white minority. The wealth of the country still obviously in minority hands. I could never shake the consciously voiced thoughts that I was walking on cobblestone streets and roads paved with black labor. Apartheid looms powerfully in my own personal consciousness, especially as I was growing up. I remember buying the anti-apartheid EP, Sun City, watching those protests on TV. Big, bad apartheid. Both my physiotherapists were white. In fact, they were both blonde. In conversation with them, I discovered they were multilingual, both speaking English and Afrikaans. One spoke Zulu, and the other spoke Xhosa. This blew my mind completely. And then it hit me like a train. Blacks are the majority in a country that was colonized and ransacked by robber barons, just like North and South America had been before them. But black people remained the majority, with white Africans speaking their languages. We should be the majority here, as we once were. the settlers were no Abenaki, Nehiyaw, Anishinaabe, Mohawk, Mi'kmaq, Coast Salish, in addition to their settler tongues. But we are not the majority, and the settlers do not speak our languages. Ours was a different sort of experiment. The ethnic cleansing was nearly total. And since my return from abroad, I walk on the streets with a new perspective. I am painfully aware that I speak only one language fluently. We were all multilingual once because we had to be in order to trade and negotiate with the communities around us, outside of ours. But as we were wiped from the face of the continent, we lost those opportunities and the obligation to communicate in each other's languages. Indian residential school and other governmental policy furthered that experiment. So now we seek to recuperate what was lost in the fire, or denied. And I think about my journey halfway across the planet that allowed me to turn and see with new eyes the terrain we call home. Thank you.